Hello. Okay then. So in this part two of the presidency and foreign affairs and the powers he has in terms of foreign affairs, we're going to have a look at, well, who helps the president with his foreign policy? Because clearly he doesn't do it all on his little own son. Okay, and the first person we're going to have a look at with regards to this is the State Department. Okay, I suppose this kind of translates as being like the Foreign Office in the UK. Their website says, quote, they're responsible for the conduct of foreign relations to promote security and well-being of the United States. You'll find the State Department is where the ambassadors are kind of answerable to. The State Department kind of do negotiations and the kind of behind the scenes with kind of diplomacy, that type of stuff. The current Secretary of State is Anthony Blinken, Blinken. Again, obviously, he needs to be approved by the US Senate to be. Sorry, that's the cat behind me. He needs to be approved by the US Senate for that position. Now, the State Department has a budget of $52.5 billion. So, they spend quite a bit of cash. And they've got about 75,000 staff as well. So it's quite a big department. And in fact, it's one of the original departments as well. George Washington, back in 1780s, there were three government departments: State, Treasury, and War. And so the State Department is obviously one of those. Now, speaking of war, the other department is the Department of Defense. This is based, their HQ is the Pentagon, which is in Virginia, just outside the city of Washington, D.C. Obviously, a bit like the UK, it's involved, it's in terms of negotiating arms deals and the US military. It's got a massive budget. The budget of the Defense Department is $721.5 billion. Billion. That's around about 500 million. 500 million. So let's get this right. 500 billion quid. So an awful big budget. It's probably about 2/3 or 3/4 of what the entire UK spends on everything. So massive budget. There are 747,000 civilian staff, and then the total number of staff is 1.34 million. So a huge department. This is the current Secretary of State for Defence. Is a retired 4-star general, and I've just forgotten his name, unfortunately, but pretty sure look on Wikipedia. You can all look on the website, you'll be able to find out his name. Notice, by the way, comparing the US and UK in terms of cabinet, this person, retired 4-star general, turns in charge of defence, not unusual, compared to the UK, where the department cabinet ministers have to come from Parliament. So you've got a 4-star military general versus the UK Defence Secretary, who isn't, basically. So a lot more experience for these people. You've also got the intelligence agencies as well, and there's a number of these. There's 14 or 15 of them. One criticism that was made before 9/11 was the fact they're very much in competition with each other, these different intelligence agencies. And the problem was that they didn't really coordinate with each other. People like the CIA, for example, and these organisations. And there was an investigation after 9/11, and they basically concluded that between the intelligence agencies, they could have pieced together roughly what was going to take place. One agency had a bit of information about one bit of the plot, one agency had a bit of information about another bit of the plot, but there's no one to coordinate them, and they're always in competition with each other. So what happened in 2000 and I've got the date somewhere, wherever it was, just after 9/11, when they had the investigation, I think it was 2004, they basically, Congress passed an act to coordinate the intelligence agencies, to make it into a more formidable thing, I suppose. And the final group which helps the president is the National. Go back page. Is the National Security Council. This was created by Harry Truman back in 1947, and its role is basically to help the president make foreign policy decisions. Sometimes they might be quite quick decisions in some kind of emergency, but they give that kind of advice. I suppose one issue which the president has is that the State Department always favour diplomacy and being nice to people. The Defence Department, they want to use their nice new shiny weapons, so they tend to be a bit more aggressive. And so the National Security Council, I suppose, it kind of mediates between the two. The president usually chairs the National Security Council. The vice president is often there. The State Department, Defense Department, Homeland Security Department. These people are often within these meetings of the National Security Council, which is there to try and coordinate all these people, to give advice to the president and to help the president make decisions. Okay, so that is kind of the presidency regarding these. But what do the other branches do regarding checking presidential power overseas? And what role do these other branches have? So Congress, first of all. We know about its constitutional position. We did that on the second or third slide. They've also given themselves, if you like, or they tried to kind of give themselves kind of greater authority over the presidency. One issue was Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, basically, it's called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. There's this big battleship, it was sunk in the Gulf, and essentially, I am kind of oversimplifying it, but Congress basically passed this resolution which said, Mr. President, do what you like in Vietnam. And so he did. And of course, Vietnam went horribly wrong. Loads of American citizens died, loads of Vietnamese died. They actually didn't prevent communism spreading to both parts of Vietnam. Complete disaster, okay? Public became very, very hostile. So in the 1970s, you begin to see Congress trying to reassert some kind of control, I suppose, over the presidency. And the first one was 1972, the Case-Zablocki Act, named after two US senators. Basically, what it said was that executive agreements must Congress must be informed of executive agreements within 60 days of them being made. So within 60 days, the president has got to write to the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and say, I've made this agreement with X and this is what it's about. In 1978, that was extended to include oral agreements, which the president has made as well. So they're trying to get round this kind of secret deals, if you like, which presidents might make, may well have made during Vietnam. Now, I did find, I can't remember where now, but between 1978 and 1992, only 19% of executive agreements actually went to Congress within the 60 days, which might suggest that presidents are not that keen to keep to the spirit of the law or even the law itself. The other power which Congress kind of gave, I won't say gave itself, but the act it gave in this area, is something called the War Powers Act, passed in 1973. And again, this is to try and have more control over the military being used abroad. And so this law says that Congress must be informed within 48 hours of the troops being used abroad. So if a president deploys the troops abroad, he's got to write a nice letter to Congress within 48 hours to say, oh, by the way, I've sent these troops to this place. Then, within 60 days, Congress must approve of those troops being used abroad. And if they don't approve of those troops being used in the theatre where they've been sent to, they've got to then begin the process of returning them back home. Now, again, how effective is this law is very debatable, and actually part of your homework is going to be on this. But in 1999, Congress told Bill Clinton, President Clinton, do not use military force, American military force, in the former Yugoslavia. Clinton ignored them and did so. In 2011, Obama used US military force in Libya, which is kind of what this picture is alluding to. He stated that he didn't need the approval of Congress. He was basically continuing the conflict or the war on terror which George Bush had established earlier. Congress were not very happy about this, and they rebuked him. So they passed this resolution to say, you've been a very naughty president, essentially. So there's these two attempts by Congress to try and have more influence, I suppose, over foreign affairs. Congress has rejected treaties, and I mentioned one at the beginning of the first slide, which was, it says trying to find it, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2012. So, treaties don't always just sail through. They have passed laws supporting and opposing the president. So we've seen these two here, where obviously the Congress was trying to rein in the president. They have at times as well invited foreign leaders to speak to Congress and they haven't needed the approval of the president, because obviously they're a separate branch, aren't they? And so the Republicans invited the Israeli Prime Minister, who's fairly right-wing, a man called Benjamin Netanyahu, to come to Congress in May 2015. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu and Obama were not exactly best buddies, and so it was partly done to kind of annoy Obama, and Benjamin Netanyahu kind of had sympathies with the Republican Party or vice versa. He didn't agree with the Iran nuclear deal and these sorts of things. So they can kind of invite these people to Congress, and they don't have to go via the president. You can't really imagine the UK Parliament doing that, can you? Oh, there's a picture of Benjamin Netanyahu. Congress does sometimes send delegations of congressmen abroad as well. So members of Congress might arrange foreign tours and foreign trips. Again, I was reading in preparation for this about how Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House under Donald Trump, apparently she used to quite like sending delegations of congressmen to the NATO allies of the United States. And they were kind of trying to give the impression that, don't worry about Donald Trump, we're still with you type of thing. And in fact, you might remember from last year, 2022, Nancy Pelosi actually visited Taiwan. Again, very controversial because obviously China wants control of Taiwan, the Americans don't want to give it. Huge amount of tension over Taiwan, and Nancy Pelosi heads off. It's unclear, and therefore she's given, if you like, tacit support, and Congress has given tacit support for the people of Taiwan against China. Now, it's not very clear whether Biden gave the nod for Nancy Pelosi to go, but she's kind of enough distance from him where he could kind of deny it, and therefore put pressure on China, or whether Nancy Pelosi decided to do it kind of on her own bat. I'm not entirely sure exactly which of those two scenarios that was. Okay, I think the time of this video is up, so we've got one more to do, which will be about the Supreme Court and foreign affairs, and we'll just wrap it up. So I'll see you for video 3 in a couple of minutes.